Welcome to Films That Time Forgot, where we shed light on underappreciated films and cinema's hidden gems. Major spoilers ahead for today's retrospective analysis of Tim Hunter's 1986 film River's Edge. A polarizing film that started controversy and uproar upon its release. It's also responsible for kickstarting Keanu Reeves' career, being his first starring role in a film. Roger Ebert called it an exercise of despair. Salon.com deemed it the most dark teen film of all time. After reading both Salon and Vice's articles on the film, as well as watching MGM's retrospective featurette Across the Edge, I'm compelled to agree. Not only is River's Edge the darkest teen film ever made for its time, it's the defining cinematic portrayal of Generation X, and responsible for legitimizing Keanu Reeves as a future leading man in Hollywood. River's Edge is a fictionalized account of a 1981 murder case in Milpitas, California, in which 16-year-old Anthony Jacques Broussard strangled 14-year-old Macy Conrad and dumped her body near the foothills outside of town. For 2 days, Conrad's murder went unreported, as Broussard brought classmates from Milpitas High School to view Conrad's dead body. The story received widespread media attention. The media and baby boomers questioned if their children were completely amoral and why they didn't seem to value life. In River's Edge, a group of friends grapple with what to do after their friend John has murdered his girlfriend Jamie and leads them to the location of her body on the titular's River's Edge. The story is mostly episodic, dealing with the different characters' reactions to the murder and how they process it. Some are horrified, others are intrigued. Some of the characters fail to feel anything, but none of them are active, failing to alert the police for days. The film was an early role for several members of the cast like Keanu Reeves, Ione Skye, and Crispin Glover. The film was directed by Tim Hunter and shot by cinematographer Frederick Elms. Both of them collaborated with David Lynch several times. Hunter would go on to direct episodes of Twin Peaks and other shows like Breaking Bad and Deadwood. Elms had already worked with David Lynch, shooting both Eraserhead and Blue Velvet the same year. Like Twin Peaks, River's Edge deals with similar subject matter. A teen girl is brutally murdered for unclear reasons. It highlights the dark underbelly of suburbia. But while Twin Peaks has a quirky soap opera energy and more lovable characters, River's Edge depicts a harsher world, where no such charms exist to alleviate the dark subject matter. Keanu Reeves plays Matt, the closest we get to a protagonist or moral compass in this movie. He is the only one disturbed by how cavalier the rest of the team seem to be about the murder. He eventually does inform the police about the whereabouts of Jamie's body. Even then, he is given a hard time by the authorities, who question his reluctance to come forward earlier. He has a tough home life too, with a disturbed younger brother who idolizes him, an overworked mom, and a drunk stepfather.
Why should you care? You just stay around here to fuck my mother and eat her food.
Nah.
Keanu Reeves is an actor with an interesting range. He became famous for his portrayal of goofball Ted in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the movie that catapulted him into stardom. In the 90s, he became known for action roles in Speed, Point Break, and the Matrix trilogy. He's very stoic in these roles. River's Edge is the perfect blend of those two acting styles. He feels like a real teenager who is troubled but not articulate enough to make sense of his angst.
It affected me. Didn't it affect you?
It did.
I mean, we knew Jamie, right? And there she is, dead right there in front of us. And even that close, we don't even feel like we've lost anything.
Casting director Carrie Fraser said this about Reeves. When Keanu Reeves came in, he hadn't done anything and wasn't being represented by anybody. He was what's called a hip pocket client, meaning they didn't know if they wanted to sign him. They were just testing him out. He walked in the door and I went, "Oh my god, this is my guy." It was just because of the way he held his body. His shoes were untied, and what he was wearing looked like a young person growing into being a man. I was over the moon about him. Matt's younger brother Tim is a juvenile in the making. He idolizes John the murderer and flirts with drugs and violence without hesitation. After being the first to witness the aftermath of the murder, Tim tries to tag along with John, stealing beer for him and asking for dope. We question if he's destined to continue the cycle of violence and become like John. The opening scene mirrors the character's actions. Tim throws his sister's doll, a symbol of youth and purity, into the river, where he witnesses John with Jamie's corpse. John has similarly destroyed something defined by youth and possibility, Jamie. The message here is that perhaps these kids are growing up too fast, with little to no moral figures to look up to, which only leads to a continued cycle of criminality and violence born out of desperation. Tim and his nunchuck-wielding friend ride their bikes around town looking for adventure, much like the kids in Stranger Things. Although their adventures are not as supernatural, they're perhaps far darker and more insidiously troubling. After being punished and beaten up by his older brother Matt for destroying his sister's doll, he toys with the idea of murder as well.
Go get your nunchucks in your dad's car. I know where we can get a gun.
John is the catalyst for the film's existence, but he's not really an active character. His actions take place before the film starts. Beyond that, he is in a daze for the rest of the film. Fatalistic and nonchalant about getting caught, the only possible motive we are given is that Jamie could have possibly been criticizing his deceased mother.
He had his reasons. She was shooting her mouth off about his mom.
His mother's dead.
Yeah. See?
But this is all speculation on the group's part. He really only shows emotion when recounting the murder, or when that guy from Seinfeld refuses to sell him beer.
Don't be an asshole.
Let go of the beer.
The clerk was played by actor Taylor Negron. He often appeared as a mean older adult to teenagers in films like Fast Times at Ridgemount High as the pizza delivery man,
Order the double cheese and sausage. Right here, dude.
or Better Off Dead as the creepy, pervy postal worker.
What's a little boy like you doing with big boy smut like this?
Lane is the most active character in the film. He assumes the role of the leader. He immediately makes it his mission to protect John from getting caught, as a way of proving his loyalty to his friend. He intimidates the other teens into silence.
Okay, listen up. Got a lot of people here. Bury her so she's never found.
He has weird moral justifications for doing so, but they sort of make sense if you don't look at it too closely.
What?
You don't understand a goddamn thing, do you? Jamie is dead, damn it. And there's nothing that we can do to save her. Now, I happen to like Jamie, but John is still alive.
In a memorably meta moment, he describes their situation as so surreal it could have only come from a movie.
It's like some fucking movie, you know? Friends, second grade, fucking like this. And then one of us gets himself in potentially big trouble. And now we've got to deal with it. We've got to test our loyalty against all odds.
Crispin Glover's performance is so manic that it rivals Nicolas Cage in Vampire's Kiss. Many critics found it off-putting. However, I feel like it's a necessary bit of comic relief, and Glover is severely entertaining with his line readings like this.
I've known you for too fucking long to let something like that happen to you.
And this.
You don't even care, do you?
I ain't drinking it.
About yourself, you dumb fuck.
And this.
Leave me alone! You don't know what's going on. None of you know what's going on!
Director Tim Hunter was ambivalent about casting Glover. Although he was a recognizable name, having been in Back to the Future the previous year as George McFly.
And he had been in Back to the Future, of course, so we thought, well, Crispin might be a good bet for us. He's somewhat well known, and we can anchor the rest of the cast around him.
His reputation as an uncompromising and eccentric actor was already well known.
We thought that we might want to cast Crispin Glover. We wanted to cast Crispin Glover, but we didn't really know much about Crispin Glover.
I'm serious, Tim.
I essentially went in for, essentially played it the way that I play it in the film.
And the producers and I, were sort of stunned by the audition, and we just kind of looked around and did a double take. And then we went through a process where we had to decide whether this fairly radical interpretation of the character would work for the film and what it would do to the balance of the film.
There's a more, there's not really a technical word for it, but I'll call it naturalism, underplaying something. Then I got the offer for the part. Tim had watched the audition back with both of the ways that I played it, and he said he liked the way that I originally came in with it, and so we agreed to do it that way.
Clarissa and the other teens simply do nothing. They are too unmotivated and perplexed by the novelty of the situation. An hilarious scene that shows off the self-absorbed bubble they live in. They forget the number for the police.
Who do I call anyway? The police, I guess. Well, I'm supposed to know the number? Well, call the operator. You do it. I don't know what to say.
Clarissa and Matt are the only two who are disturbed by their lack of feeling and reluctance to call the police. This experience brings them together romantically as they attempt to make sense of the situation. When the media discovers the crime, the teens struggle to relay their experience or articulate themselves intelligently.
Pretty hard for us to be,
Objective?
Yeah, that's it, objective. Since we did know the two alleged people involved and everything. And whereas we might be all, upset this morning or something, we're not, because of the fact that we're not objective at all. I also play guitar, by the way.
The adults in this film are merely stereotypical baby boomers, self-righteous with an overinflated sense of importance. They are always judging the younger generation. The teacher boasts about how much more socially aware and influential his generation's efforts were back in the late 60s.
Fundamental changes were made. The change is so basic that we now take them for granted. The civil rights movement, later the women's movement. I mean, like it or not, ladies, you're now expected to have careers. Then maybe later, the husbands and the babies. In Vietnam, we stopped the war, man.
After the news of the murder spreads, he lashes out at his students for not being fazed enough by Jamie's death.
You don't give a damn? I don't give a damn. Nobody in this classroom gives a damn that she's dead. It gives us a chance to feel superior and to point up a fundamental moral breakdown in society, but it doesn't really affect us, does it?
The only positive depiction of adults is Dennis Hopper's character Feck, a local drug dealer who supplies the teens with weed and is in love with a doll. He tries to relate to them in his own way. Hopper is essentially reprising his role from Easy Rider, a hell-raising remnant of the 60s era, now too tired to rouse society or cause any trouble. Like John Sampson, this ex-biker also murdered his girlfriend once. However, he was haunted by his actions. John realizes killing made him feel like a god and does not intend to stop anytime soon, resigned to the fact that he'll get caught anyway, so why stop what he wants to do? Feck tries to see the good in John, but ultimately decides to kill him when he recognizes him for the monster he truly is becoming. The film ends after the authorities have caught up to John's body and arrested Feck for the murder. Jamie's wake concludes the film, providing closure for these surreal couple of days for the kids. While the finale feels a bit abrupt and rushed, it feels authentic. Life often doesn't have closure, and the film captures that. Can people commit evil without being evil? By being simple bystanders to murder, are we complicit in it? Does the film say this new generation is morally bankrupt and too self-absorbed to feel anything sincere? Or is their situation due to a lack of opportunities or adult role models to look up to? The teens here are almost sleepwalking, numbed out on chemical substances, video games, and heavy metal. These teens are part of Generation X, those born after the baby boomers between 1965 and 1979. They came of age in the 80s and 90s. The label Generation X emerged in 1991, coined by Douglas Copeland's novel Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture. They were depicted as cynical and disaffected, a lost generation living in the shadow of their baby boomer parents and rebelling against them at all costs. They were also known as the latchkey generation, children of divorce left to try and figure out life for themselves. While the baby boomers lived through the 60s counterculture and had plenty of worthwhile causes to fight for like civil rights, women's rights, and gay rights, these teens had a lot of time on their hands and nowhere to channel their energy. They saw how their parents' generation eventually sold out to the establishment and settled into 9-to-5 careers and saw them as phonies, not to be trusted. That attitude is reflected here. The adults in the film represent the communication breakdown between the baby boomers and Generation X.
Didn't kill anybody, damn it! John did it. John wasted Jamie.
You don't seem too concerned about it.
Oh, what the hell do you know?
However, they don't try to inspire them or acknowledge their own hypocrisy, judging the younger generation the same way they were judged and scrutinized. This prevents the teens from feeling like they can trust any adults or confide in them in any way. It's funny to look at now, given how the boomers have shifted their anxiety onto millennials more recently. Generation X has become the forgotten middle child of generations. Unlike most coming-of-age films, this film presents adolescence as a horrifying time of indecision, aimlessness, and phony posturing. These teens behave like sheep, falling in a herd mentality. They don't want to betray their supposed coolness and disaffected image by posing as if they care about events, even if it's the murder of a classmate. No one wants to be singled out for speaking up or doing the right thing. It's like the bystander effect, where people tend to not intervene during dangerous situations, hoping someone else will first. While the history of teen movies is relatively short, dating back to the 1950s when the concept of a teenager was a relatively new social phenomena, the genre has gone through much change. Teen films, or coming-of-age films as they're often referred to, tackle generally universal themes, like finding your place in the world and making sense of the world as you enter an age where you have to take responsibility for where your life will be headed. Parental conflict, bullying, peer pressure, social cliques, and alienation are recurring themes as well. However, the norm for teen cinema has historically been to gloss over these issues or trivialize them in a way. Although teen films ask generally existential questions, they're formulaic by nature. Characters generally fall into archetypes: the jock, the nerd, the prom queen, the rebel, the loner, etc. Their problems usually disappear or are solved in a tidy bow by the end credits. While early teen films like Rebel Without a Cause and 400 Blows honestly depicted the pains of adolescence, the 1970s and 80s saw teen films becoming more generic and formulaic. Movies like American Graffiti, Meatballs, and Porky's presented audiences with teens focused on mostly satisfying their urges. The plots of these films often concern things like losing your virginity or partying. While plenty of quality films were still made about teenagers during these years, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, The Outsiders, and John Hughes' Molly Ringwald trilogy, composed of The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, and Pretty in Pink, they all seemed to be written by old men who were pandering to what they thought teens wanted to hear. These movies portray the teenage experience we wish we had, rather than how it actually was. For a brief time in the 90s, this all changed. Suddenly more serious and subversive films like Heathers, Menace to Society, and Kids were released. The teens in these films had problems that couldn't be fixed right away. They dealt with things like suicide, violence, STDs, and depression. Even the look of teen films changed. Suddenly the style of teen films became grittier, the clothes more disheveled, the music more abrasive. These films were speaking to kids without judgment, portraying their experiences, warts and all. This was short-lived, and the 2000s brought back the old formulaic rules and structure to teen films. Films that explore potentially edgy or sensitive material were often comedic satires like Mean Girls, Jennifer's Body, and Easy A. But for a brief window in independent cinema, teen films were uncompromising in telling stories that needed to be heard. While no single event or film can explain this cultural shift in how teens were portrayed in the media, the best early indicator for this cultural shift was Tim Hunter's River's Edge. The film defined Generation X before they even were a name and concept. The style here predated grunge and the burgeoning alternative movement. The teens here are dressed in ripped denim, patched leather jackets, faded band tees. Tracks by thrash metal and punk rock acts like Slayer and the Wipers immediately led some indie cred to the film. Tim Hunter's style here is very gritty and grounded in reality for the most part. The camera is mostly stationary or handheld. Elms uses a washed-out color palette, mostly blues and grays. The set design is minimal, but has character and feels lived in. The pace is mostly episodic, but it works for the subject matter of this film, and what it's saying about these kids' lifestyles. Neil Jimenez's script feels like a first script, but it feels inspired and true to life given how young he was at the time. While the film doesn't offer any solutions or answers to the questions it says about youth, morality, or generational warfare, it explores real human reactions to these questions. The characters feel like authentic people, and while some aspects of it may be stylistically dated, the film has influenced many others and created its own bizarre subgenre. Films like Bully, Mean Creek, and Super Dark Times also involve groups of teens finding themselves, by their own actions, into dire situations that result in accidental death or murder. Ultimately, River's Edge explores how during our teens, the enormity of life and experience can overwhelm us and leave us frozen, unable to do the right thing or articulate ourselves. It's simply a great movie that's entertaining and thought-provoking. It's juvenile and profound at the same time. That paradox gives the film a singular identity. I give River's Edge a 10 out of 10. Thanks for watching another segment of Films That Time Forgot. Please subscribe for more videos and content, reviews, and retrospectives. This is Jeremiah. Thanks, and continue watching.